going to hand over to Darren. Over to you, Darren.
Well, thank you, Randolph, and thank you to the ENA for putting together this roundtable this afternoon. Delighted to be with you. I think the agenda suggests that I'm giving a keynote, which sounds a bit grander than what I'm actually going to deliver, just to manage expectations from the top. But as you would expect, as a select committee scrutinising the business department, we do a lot of work in this space and have been doing more recently than we might normally for the obvious reasons. Many of you, I'm sure, will know, and I can see some names of people who contributed to our work on the decarbonising heat in homes inquiry, which has finished and reported. And we also have a new inquiry, which I'm sure some of you have contributed to as well, which is linked around delivery of a net zero electricity system by 2035. And I'll just talk a bit about both of those from our perspective on the committee corridor. Firstly, to go straight to the heart of the topic today around decarbonising heat in homes. I mean, you're all from the industry, so I don't need to tell you things you already know. And you will have seen the Committee on Climate Change's report to Parliament last week. It's still a major headache for the country. We've still haven't got a national programme from government, a delivery mechanism for decarbonising heat in our homes and buildings across the country, and it's urgent. 20% of the UK's total emissions is from buildings, and the majority of that comes from our homes. And as we know, most of our housing stock in the UK is old, and the rate of new build means that by the time we get to 2035 and 2050, most of it will still be old. And so we have no choice but to retrofit and reduce energy demand in buildings through energy efficiency work. That means if we're going to hit our targets, we need to see a 55% reduction by 2035 compared to 2019 in emissions from our buildings. I mean, that's a huge change, 55% reduction compared to 2019 in emissions from buildings. And also alongside that, we are told that we should obviously move to low carbon heating sources as well as the energy efficiency in our homes. And we should see, according to the Committee on Climate Change, around a 30% drop in energy demand, both in terms of the efficiency of our buildings, but also moving 50% of our heat sources to low carbon heat sources by 2035. So this is an enormous piece of work. There's been no real change since 2015. So unlike in other parts of the economy where we've seen decarbonisation accelerate well, in the buildings part of our work, we've not seen any real change at all at a national level. So we're almost starting, well, from a starting position. The government, as you will know, launched the Green Homes Grant, which failed in its delivery. Money from that was moved around. Some money was still funding the local authority delivery aspects of the Green Homes Grant, which has been reasonably good. There's also a programme from government on helping homes that are low carbon and off gas grid with their energy efficiency and low carbon heating solutions, and there's also the public sector decarbonisation scheme. But even those schemes, so the local authority delivery scheme for the Green Homes Grant, the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and the low income off gas grid home scheme, all three of those have been given an amber rating by the National Audit Office, which essentially means that there are significant problems in the delivery of those major programmes by the business department that require urgent managerial attention. And of course, we've had the recent voucher scheme on the gas boiler replacement scheme. Of course, you can only access that voucher if you've already done the energy efficiency work in your home as recommended in the EPC. So we started to see the number of applications coming through now on the voucher scheme. We don't yet have the information from government about how many of those have been successful and therefore resulted in a boiler being swapped out for a lower carbon source of heating. The bad news, certainly in my view, is that last Tuesday, when we had Kwasi Kwarteng, the Secretary of State, before the Select Committee, he, on the one hand, announced that he will very soon be coming forward with a replacement for the Green Homes Grant, so a kind of more generalised programme for energy efficiency work in buildings across the country. That's good. The bad news is that he's not being given any extra money by the Treasury. And so he has said that he has already decided that he's having to move money around. So the public sector decarbonisation scheme, how do we increase energy efficiency in our hospitals and police stations and schools and the public sector estate, but also money from the gas boiler replacement voucher scheme is going to be moved into whatever this new scheme is going to be. We are expecting an energy bill anytime soon. Some rumours are suggesting it might come tomorrow or Thursday. We're certainly expecting second reading before the summer recess. And whilst energy efficiency work doesn't require primary legislation, although some of you might remind me that we're waiting for the Eco4 regulations from government, I suspect or I hope that any announcement of a new energy efficiency programme might come alongside that either this week or in the coming weeks. And so from a select committee perspective, we are deeply worried about the effective delivery from government on decarbonising heat in homes. Some of my colleagues will say this is for industry, not for government. In fact, I'll be saying in the House of Commons later today in the net zero estimates debate that this is perhaps the ideological problem. I know this is a cross-party discussion, but you wouldn't be surprised with what I'm about to say. The Conservatives tend to think that you announce a policy, put a policy signal into the economy, and the market will respond and therefore deliver what you need. You do that by setting targets, by incentivizing behavior, by fining companies for not doing things that you want them to do. We've seen this from government consulted on recently around heat pump manufacturing targets compared to gas boilers. But in essence, the government really kind of steps back. It's set the direction of travel. It kind of wants the market to deliver. The Labour Party, on the other hand, and I'm a Labour MP, but also in my cross-party role, I agree with this argument, thinks that actually the scale of the work here, street by street, in every town, village, city, community, across the entire country, over many, many years, requires the state to roll up its sleeves, to be more involved, not in delivering directly from the centre, but in coordinating, working with local authorities, working with private sector providers, working with banks. There are no energy efficiency, low-cost products that I can see at the moment available to households to make sure that delivery is effective across the country. And I don't think that's important just because of the scale of the work, but because the chopping and changing, the constant chopping and changing between policies, financing, timelines, how any private sector business can invest with any sense of confidence and certainty about what they're going to be asked to do and how they're going to be asked to do it is beyond me. I mean, they can't, essentially. You can't. And so for something that is in the top 3 decarbonisation priorities for the country, decarbonising heat in buildings, the state of the policy framework, I think, is totally unacceptable. And that's even before we get into transport decarbonisation or industrial decarbonisation. That's why the Committee on Climate Change were very clear last week that whilst they applaud the government in setting the targets and the ambitions, announcing things like the heat and building strategy, putting in the decarbonisation targets as part of our nationally determined contributions, they urgently need to come forward with a delivery plan. How are you going to ensure that you're going to hit those targets? What are your contingency plans if things don't go right over the next few years? And how will you report on that and engage with the wider economy and, importantly, with the public to make sure that you can deliver that? My deep political worry is that there are some parts of the political debate in our country who maybe no longer deny climate change in the way they used to, but still very much believe it's not that urgent and there's not really a role for the state to play here. And whilst there are very high levels of support from the public around action on climate change, the depth of understanding about what that means for all of us in all of our homes across the entire country is very low. And if we do not get the delivery of this scheme done properly, so that people are not annoyed when suddenly they're being asked to change their boilers or insulate their lofts or change their windows, and develop a scheme that actually means that that's a real opportunity for people, then I think we will lose the consent of the public to act on this very quickly, and that will lead to our inability to hit our net zero target and the climate consequences that come from that. The last thing that I will say, I've alluded to slightly around where I think the banks need to be doing more, but I think the government needs to be doing more as well in terms of targeting taxpayer support to households who need it. The average household in this country, once you take away rent, has a disposable income of £9,000 a year. That's the average. And yet at the moment, the estimate to do the energy efficiency work and low carbon work in the home is on average £10,000. If you're in a house that has cavity walls and a loft and it's not too difficult to deal with it. I mean, how can you say to a household when energy bills are going up, the cost of food is going up, the cost of everything is going up, pay's not going up in line with inflation? Hey, I know that on average you only have disposable income of £9,000 a year, but I want you to spend at least £10,000 a year doing this work. Oh, and you can't even access the voucher scheme to replace your boiler until you've done it. It just doesn't make sense. And so if the government is serious about the country hitting these targets, it is going to have to step in and help in a much, much more interventionist way than it is at the moment. And I can't really see that ambition coming out of government yet, which is a deep worry for us. And then just to finish, just to flag again, our new inquiry on power sector targets. Of course, if we're going to move to or move off of gas towards electricity, or a significant amount of electricity for heating and cooling, we don't talk enough about cooling in this country. Even though it's getting hotter and hotter every summer, of course, we need to have the electricity generation capacity, the storage, and flexible distribution capabilities to be able to meet people's needs. And that, again, is a huge infrastructure task that we've got to get our heads around. So if you've not already, please take a look at our new inquiry on the power sector 2035 strategy. And when we get back after the summer, we're going to start taking oral evidence on where we are, where we need to be, what the gap is, and how we make sure that we deliver that for the people of this country, for our economy, and indeed for the planet. I shamefully did not look at what time I started speaking, but I feel like that's probably enough. And so I will hand over.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Darren. Really strong points, very insightful points. I think a lot of us here will be able to get behind quite a few of those points, particularly around the difficulty of doing this in the home. I completely agree with you on cooling, etc. So really appreciate your time for joining us today. That was fantastic. Okay, so the next part of the presentation is I'm going to give a couple of slides just introducing ENA. And what our members are doing to try and support decarbonisation of residential heating, and then we'll go to the Q&A panel with Barbara. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so as I said, I'm Randolph, one of the directors here at ENA. And who are the ENA? So the Energy Networks Association, we represent all of the gas and electricity networks, the wires and pipes in the UK and Ireland at transmission and distribution level. So you can see all of our members there. The top two boxes represent our electricity members, and the bottom two are our gas equivalent. We also have National Grid ESO as the system operator for GB. So I think Darren very eloquently introduced the sort of the climate change challenge and what we're trying to do to achieve net zero. I think the one thing I'd like to highlight is that there's always a balance with when you're trying to transition an energy system. Obviously, net zero is the key focus of us, but we have to maintain reliable energy supplies, keep the lights on, keep the gas flowing. And we also need to do this in as affordable a way as possible. That's what they call the energy trilemma. And I think in the UK, we've been very successful historically at keeping our cost relatively low while decarbonising. And we've had very reliable supplies while that's happened. And for a while there, we kind of forgot little bit about the reliability and the energy security part of the trilemma. However, now with obviously the cost of gas, the war in Ukraine, storms that we had earlier this year, reliability and security have come right back to the fore, and we need to really think about that when we're talking about transitioning to net zero. So I think Darren described it quite well as a headache, heating. I like this meme personally. You know, when it comes to net zero, obviously the whole economy has to transition to net zero, and we're doing pretty well in some areas, especially areas like electricity and bringing on renewables. However, without a doubt, heating is the elephant in the room. It's the most difficult. It's the one that we have the least amount of policy certainty on, the least amount of technology certainty on. So it is definitely, in our view, the biggest challenge, and hence that's why I particularly like this meme that highlights that. As Darren said, it's also a big headache for us. So what are we doing in terms of E&A? Sorry, this is just highlighting the challenge again. I think Darren's been through a lot of this. 85% of our homes are connected to gas networks and use gas for heating, cooking, and hot water. We need to reduce our household emissions from almost 3 tonnes a day to 135 kilos, which is a 95% drop. And heating represents about 1/3 of our overall energy emissions, and that percentage is increasing as the decarbonisation of electricity and transport increases. So the percentage of our emissions, a larger percentage, is coming from home heating. But what are we doing as networks to support the transition and enable this decarbonisation? Well, the first thing to note is that we're very much taking a whole systems approach. We do not like thinking in silos. When we talk about decarbonising homes, we've got to think about the impacts on the whole energy system. And we also need to look at all the options that we have for that decarbonisation. So obviously, as Darren mentioned, heat pumps is going to be a key technology, the electrification of heat. We also potentially have hydrogen and biomethane, which represent green gases. And often overlooked is district heating as well. That plays a big role in other countries and could play a big role here as well going forward. There is no silver bullet. There's going to be different solutions for different locations, different places, different types of houses. So we like to work very closely with local authorities and local communities to understand what's best for them in their specific location and their region. So we've got 2 key strategic projects that are looking to transition both our gas and electricity networks, and hence to support decarbonisation of home heating. The first one's our Gas Goes Green project. It's looking to create the world's first zero carbon gas grid, which is obviously looking to move from natural gas to hydrogen, potentially some biomethane as well. And one of the steps in the journey to doing that is blending hydrogen into the existing gas network. And we've said that we'll be ready to deliver 20% blend in the existing gas network by 2023. On the electricity side of the business, we have our Open Networks project, which is effectively our smart grid project to transition the electricity networks to a smart, flexible grid. Part of that includes creating local markets for flexibility services, which not only deliver more capacity for the connection at heat pumps at a lower cost, but indeed, if you have a smart heat pump, and particularly if you have a smart heat pump that's paired with some form of thermal storage, that will actually be able to provide the flexibility back to the grid. So it will enable people to actually provide services to grids and hence earn an additional revenue stream from that. So those 2 projects, they could be theoretical projects. They could just be strategies written on paper, but that's not how we operate at E&A. We very much take a learn by doing approach. That is key to everything we do. All of our projects are very much evidence driven. So over the years, we've run a whole range of innovation projects and trials to understand what works best and where, and with what customers in what type of homes. So a couple of examples, Wales and West Utilities have looked at hybrid heating systems, which combine a hydrogen-fueled boiler with an electrically powered heat pump. We've had UK Power Networks looking at the Community Heat project, which is effectively looking at how we could switch off gas grid communities from oil boilers and the like to low carbon heating using electricity such as heat pumps. We've also got the gas networks committing to develop the world's first net zero industrial cluster by 2030, including having at least one low carbon cluster by the industrial clusters by 2030, but having one low carbon cluster by 2030. And we've also recently launched our whole systems innovation strategy. This is the first time that we've ever had a strategy in the UK that looks across gas and electricity from an innovation perspective. So that will help us, again, target solutions and help customers understand how to decarbonise their homes while considering the impacts on the whole energy system, which is absolutely critical to keeping costs down. So I will pause there. I'm now going to hand over to the wonderful Dr. Barbara Vest, OBE. Barbara is an absolute champion for the energy industry, has a lot of experience, and also, I must say, is a very engaging speaker. So really looking forward to the panel with Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. How on earth do I compete with that? Okay, so I would really like to say thank you to Darren and Randolph for what they've done so far, and also to Dan and Josh for lining up some oh sorry, that I hope you're not able to hear that, my phone went. And also to Dan and Josh for lining up 3 great speakers. Can I just say before moving on, Darren, I was really pleased to hear you mention the need for a coordinated delivery plan required to enable success with what the big job that we have going forward with the housing stock in particular. I'm old enough to remember when we had our coal fires ripped out and there was a big coordinated plan to install our central heating. And that couldn't have worked unless it was done house by house and street by street. Much like we should have had the smart metering programme carried out, but never mind, that's another thing. Anyway, I have 3 fabulous speakers to introduce to you this afternoon. What I'm going to do is go to each of them individually. They're going to provide us with a 5-minute overview of what they want to cover today. And at the end of that, I'll ask a couple of quick fire questions just to get the panel flowing and then open things out to the wider audience. And I see a couple of you have already started popping a couple of questions or observations into the chat. So please carry on doing that. That would be fabulous. I am going to be an old-fashioned girl and go ladies first. So I'm going to introduce Charlotte Adams to you, who is a principal manager looking at mine water heat for the Coal Authority. And this may be a topic that you haven't heard about yet, but honestly, up in the northeast, we're all for it because we have lots of mines and there's lots of heat there for Charlotte and her colleagues to extract. The Mine Water Heat programme seeks to use heat exchangers and heat pumps to recover heat from the abandoned and disused mine shafts. And Charlotte will tell us a bit about that. The extracted heat is then used for district heating networks to heat homes. And I'm proud to say that in the northeast, there's a couple of projects that are up and running, and Charlotte is heavily involved with them. And hopefully she's going to tell us more now. Over to you, Charlotte. Oh, we had you. And then, that's it, great.
Has that worked fine?
Yeah, that's super, thanks.
A bit of a delay there, but thank you, Barbara, for that introduction, and thank you also to the ENA for the opportunity to be here today and to talk to you about how we're working at scale at the moment with local authorities, using our mining legacy to turn something that was a liability into an opportunity and also a solution for decarbonising heat. This topic, we were fortunate enough to be involved in a recent 1922 inquiry along with other colleagues from other geothermal sectors, and I'm pleased to say that there's been some information on this gone out in national press over the past couple of days. So there was an article in the Times yesterday and one in the Express today, and that's not behind a paywall, so I'll drop the link for that in the chat at the end if anybody's interested. A little bit about the Coal Authority. We're a non-departmental government body. Our sponsoring department is BEIS, and our role really is we own and manage the UK mining infrastructure. Deep mining for coal in the UK ended in 2015, and so you can imagine we have now our role, which is protecting both people and the environment from the after effects of the mining industry. That includes things like managing mine water within the mines as the mines refill with water after pumps have been turned off following mine closure, and also dealing with things like subsidence that may happen. Even some years you may have things like shaft collapses in certain areas that were mined. So our role is basically protection of both people and the environment from these after effects. And the thing about this map here, so the green areas on it are the coalfield areas, and you can see that we've got quite a good correlation between some of our larger towns and cities and where the coalfield are. And that's not surprising because many of those towns and cities grew on the strength of the coal reserves that were beneath them. And that's good now because that means we've got location of centres of heat demand correlating with where the coalfields are. So we've got kind of resource and demand co-located in many areas, and in fact 9 out of 10 of our largest urban areas are kind of populated with on the coalfield. And just to give you an idea of the scope of the resource, if that diagram hasn't, we have 23,000 abandoned deep coal mines, so it gives you an idea of the potential that there is there across the UK. This little clip will show you how it works. So the basic principle is that we would take water from the mine. Maybe we'd have 2 worked seams that are now full of water, and we'd take it from a deeper seam because it'll be a little bit warmer, drop the temperature by probably around about 5 degrees, and then return it back underground. So the mine water flows through a heat exchanger and goes back underground. The heat exchanger interfaces with a heat pump because the temperatures we generally deal with day to day in the mines are between 12 and 20 degrees. So obviously at that temperature, you wouldn't want to be taking a bath in that. So having a heat pump connected to it, we can then lift the temperature either individually at the point of use in a decentralized system or in a centralized system as part of an energy centre on a heat network. The key point being that the mine water doesn't go around anybody's house. We just take it out of the ground momentarily, drop the temperature and re-inject it. So the mine water doesn't flow around the network or through any of the connected buildings. And when you've got heat pumps working in this way, because the mine water temperatures are constant year round, you can expect a coefficient of performance of 4 more or less constantly. So they're more efficient than using an air source where the air temperature drops when your heat demand is highest. This is one of the projects that we've been working with Gateshead Council on. They've very much led this. They've been a beneficiary of what was HNIP funding, which has now been replaced by the Green Heat Network Fund. But we've assisted them in drilling 3 boreholes, 2 to take the water from and 1 to return it. And this is a 3 megawatt extension to an existing 3 megawatt heat network that was running off CHP. The council wanted to grow the size of the network, supply more users, but they didn't want to double the carbon emissions by just upsizing a CHP. They asked us, can we get this additional heat we want from the mine? And this scheme is probably about 2 or 3 weeks away from being operational now. So it's a really exciting time for us to think that this, the mines that are 150 years old or so beneath this site will be an energy source for some brand new buildings and brand new housing in this area. So hopefully that very brief introduction to Mind Water Heat and the work we're doing has given you an idea of the size of the resource that's there. Globally speaking, there's about 30 projects that use this resource at the moment. They're all on lots of different sizes and scales, which shows how versatile it is for a range of different applications, but it does make it difficult to give a generic cost for how much it costs. The key thing about it is we're using existing technology, and we're using heat pumps and borehole drilling, which is very similar to drilling that's been done as part of the water industry for many years. So it's something we can do now to decarbonise heat. And the fact that we're reusing this legacy, when we talk to people in these mining communities, they're very supportive that this infrastructure that either they or their relatives worked so hard to create can be reused to solve a problem for heating in some of these areas. And heat being heat, it doesn't travel well. The benefits of these schemes is that the benefits have to be realised locally as well. So hopefully opportunities for levelling up as well as decarbonising at the same time. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll drop a bit more information, some links into the chat for you. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's brilliant. Yeah, honestly, I'm sure there'll be loads more questions because folk will want to know more about this exciting development. I am going to go to Steve Cunningham now, who is Chief Executive of GEO. Hello there, how are you? I've got my little GEO monitor in the corner there telling me what my solar's doing at the moment. So I do know your company, and I'm up to 13.1 kilowatt hours so far today generated. So I'm pretty chuffed with that.
Very good.
So Steve tells us here that GEO is a smart energy specialist and leading supplier of in-home displays as part of the Smart Rollout programme. GEO's meters aim to make use visible to customers, giving them more control of consumption. The meters monitor electricity and gas and are compliant with SMETS 1 and 2. GEO has been recognised with a Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation. Well, get you. Well done. Over to you for 2 or 3 minutes to give us a bit more of an introduction, Steve.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a little bit of a dry bit of text there. So yes, we have supplied an awful lot of smart energy monitors in the UK, and I guess we've been quite pleased with what they've done over the past. But coming up to, I guess 2 years ago now, when I joined the business, we just finished a trial, BES funded trial actually, looking at what you could do beyond just looking at energy in the home, and what you could do with more or less the same devices to help people optimize how their homes used energy overall. And that trial, called Core for Grid, ran between 2019 and 2020. And without any real rocket science in there, we were able to save 50% on people's bills. Actually, wasn't strictly 50% on average, it was 49%. It's just so close to 50% that it sounds better to say 50%, but 49% saving off over a range of homes. And that made us think really, really hard about what we were doing, and think, you know, Barbara, to your point about the smart meter rollout, is it doing as good a job as it could do? And were we doing as good a job in that rollout as we could be? And so we sat ourselves down in the middle of COVID and lockdown and the rest of it, and said, all right, let's make a better mousetrap. Let's make the display that we provide better. And our view was, if we did it right, we could make a display that effectively did all of that energy control for people in their homes. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're working on, where we've gone through our early trials with it. We've built on the Core for Grid success. We will be launching the product in the UK later this year, and it's designed to hit exactly the point that Darren was talking about earlier. This huge, and in fact, actually, Randolph talked about it as well, the elephant in the room, the heating piece. So we thought, well, if the smart meter rollout is going to put a device in, I think it's 13.5 million homes still to go, and there's 14 million homes that have smart meters. Why don't we make that really work Firstly, to help people reduce their heating cost. 80% of the UK is still on gas. Yes, at some point we need to help people move off gas, but today that problem's right there. So let's attack heating and let's see how much we can save there. And by putting a cleverer in-home display that costs the same as a current one, but just leapfrogs a generation, and by mixing that with smart thermostats that are available today, or that are cheaper and available to fit with this sort of system going forward, and Amazon have launched one, we'll be launching one as well, we can save 12 to 17% on an average bill. That, with where prices are today, you know, that's upwards of a couple of £100 when we get to October with the next price hike. And that can be delivered into every home as part of the smart meter rollout. If you make a simple smart thermostat, not a complicated one like, you know, Nest or Tado or something like that, where you're going to do a whole load of changes in the home, but something that really is a genuine replacement for an existing thermostat, but that can use the smarts from the smart meter data and from the cloud to make it work better, you can deliver those savings. And then we looked at implementing as well the call for grid savings and looking at how we could do load shifting for people. So just helping them to use multi-rate tariffs more effectively. And again, you can do that with washing machines, you can do that with dishwashers. If you've got an EV, you can do that with EVs. And you can save somewhere between 7 and 10% on an average electricity bill by doing that load shifting. You don't actually save the energy, but what you're doing is letting it move to a part of the day that is less impactful on the grid, and therefore it doesn't cost as much to manage, is lower intensity in terms of carbon, and saves the consumer money. And so that's where we're headed with our solution, is we're really trying to nail, and I think it was a common theme through those first couple of talks from Darren and Randolph, nail doing something now that can deliver that sort of 20%-ish saving on a typical home energy bill, make a net reduction in the amount of gas that's being used. And, you know, that's for the 80% of homes that are on gas today. And of those, about 80% who don't have a smart thermostat. So, you know, it's a good 60% of homes that are in that category. Use the smart meter rollout, the remainder of that rollout, to get the technology into people's homes. But once it's there, to also be able to use it, and we've heard EPCs mentioned a couple of times today as a potential barrier to moving things forward. Use the data that's being collected to create a virtual EPC to help people understand when heat pumps will work for their homes, to help them understand how to apply for grants that will support their home being more efficient, and to give them a view, a really accurate view of how well those low carbon technologies will perform in the home. So that's what we're doing in a very, very small nutshell. It launches, as I say, end of September. We think, by the way, you know, it's not unique to us. Lots of people ought to be able to provide similar technology. We think the rollout in the UK, actually, as much as it's not been done perhaps the best, most economical way, it is actually a pretty clever rollout. There's a lot of technology there that could do valuable tasks for households. And we think more ought to be done to take advantage of that ability to do those tasks. And we ought to be doing it now. As a sort of final snapshot, assuming that we get to where we want to get to with this solution, assuming we get the sort of volume in the market, doing something like this for the mass market, not for the people who can afford to buy a posh smart thermostat, but for the mass market, will bring the 2028 carbon emissions per home goals back to 2023. So it's that sort of impact that we'll have. So it's a really, really big immediate opportunity for us to do something impactful in the UK.
Excellent.
That's the mission that we're on.
Excellent. On that high note, I will say thank you very much and move to our third speaker, who is Mark Dante, Senior Strategy Manager at Northern Gas Networks. Now, as Senior Strategy Manager, Mark works on NGN's Hydrogen Home project alongside Cadent and Bays. I'm assuming that's Highgrove in Gateshead, is it? Yeah. And yep. I love the name, by the way, Aim High. Yeah. You might get the Royal Seal of Approval. You never know. The Hydrogen Home project is working to research how the network needs to adapt to transport hydrogen in the future. And the hydrogen homes are fitted with hydrogen gas appliances, including cookers and hobs, fires and boilers, and a hydrogen meter. Well, carry on and tell us more, please.
Okay, I'll just share a slide a second. So yeah, I thought I'd give you a quick overview of the work the gas industry is doing to try and to achieve net zero. And I'll as you said, Barbara, I'll give a quick overview of our hydrogen homes and a little bit on the blending project high deploy as well. So we've been working for quite a while in the gas industry now, trying to look at repurposing the gas network since about 2016, from the timeline you can see in the bottom right. And we've been looking at various research projects across the networks, so looking at repurposing the network, both for the asset side and currently now looking at our operations and procedures. We're working towards, and some of you may be aware, the village trial. We've called ours Redcar Hydrogen Community in Northern Gas, alongside Cadent, who've got their kind of sister project, if you like, across in the northwest. And we're aiming to have approximately 2,000 properties running on 100% hydrogen by mid-2025. And then the ambition, which was set out in the 10-point plan, is to have a town pilot by 2030, and that's looking between 15 and 20,000 properties and light industry running on hydrogen. Obviously, we're a gas network, but we're keen to ensure that the production and storage elements are covered off, particularly for these the trial and the town pilot. So we're working with various different production companies that are looking at investing in our trial area, which is in Redcar, as well as repurposing some of the storage caverns that are in the northeast as well. The research we're also doing is looking at new appliances for domestic and commercial, which is sitting on the back of the work that was originally done as part of the BASE project for High for Heat. And as part of that High for Heat, we were lucky to get some grant funding for these hydrogen homes that you mentioned up at our site at Wyn Leighton, which is near Gateshead, where we've built two semi-detached properties, and they run on 100% hydrogen. So they have in them two hydrogen boilers, one Baxi and one Worcester Bosch, one in each property. And then in one house, we've got a freestanding cooker. In the other one, then we've got a hob unit and a separate oven and grill. We've got two balanced flue fires in them as well, but there are as well that open flame and gas fronted fires available that have been developed as part of the High for Heat program. And also, as you mentioned, there are hydrogen ready gas meters that you can see in the bottom right there, where it's been produced or manufactured as prototypes from Fiorentini meter sit. So we have been operating the site for almost exactly a year now, and it's been extremely successful. There's been a lot of people up there, and they've basically come away almost unimpressed that, you know, it's exactly the same as you just see in a normal house. You operate the appliances the same, and you know, there's no difference. There is also some work being done again as part of a High for Heat. We're proposing to have a demonstration facility for some of the commercial appliances as well that you see in restaurants and catering facilities, as well as some space heating solutions as well. So there's various different prototypes being developed, and there'll be continued work in that area. Also on the same site, actually, we have been running the project called High Deploy. This is with Cadent, where we've been looking to demonstrate running a 20% blend on existing gas network. So that's at a site, an area called Winlayton, and we've been we isolated that area for about 670 properties, and we've been blending in 20% into the existing gas network with no changes to any of the existing appliances. So we've found that's been extremely successful. We're also following it up with some social acceptance. So obviously we spoke to the residents prior, during, and now after, because the trial actually finished last Thursday on the 30th of June. And in fact, some of the residents were disappointed that the project had to end for its trial. So that's kind of a whistle-top tour of what we're up to in the gas networks.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks very much. Great. If all three speakers would like to join me on screen now, I'll begin the Q&A. I've got loads of questions from what you've told me, but we've got an active audience, I can see. They've actually put quite a few questions into the Q&A there. I was given a few questions just as a warmer up here, which I know that you've seen, and I think you've addressed some of them in your presentation anyway. But one thing that I did really wonder about, well, there was a couple. We heard Darren talk about what the biggest blockers possibly were going forward. So I wonder, you know, what your views are on those for your particular technologies, and also about whether the government's engaged in possibly the requirement for subsidies or not going forward, because these technologies are expensive. You're you know, the first of trials, and you've got to build the things from scratch, etc. So it would be interesting to know where we go from there. Who would like to kick us off on that one? Anyone?
Can do if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, your vocal cords have just warmed up, so.
All right, thanks. Still warm. But just speaking briefly about the biggest blocker, that's really the decision on using hydrogen in domestic environment. The decision is due in 2026. As I mentioned, we're working towards a village trial in 2025, and it will be good to have that decision so that, you know, we can plan on a bigger scale. You know, the village trial is important. You know, we need that to help us learn and understand. It's very similar to what was done back in the 60s and early 70s when they changed from Thames gas to natural gas.
Yeah.
So for us, that's the biggest blocker, because I think it's holding back some innovation as well in terms of and specifically about this topic now is the development of hydrogen ready and hydrogen appliances.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, if a decision could be made on the use of or the sale of 100% hydrogen ready boilers, for instance, you know, that's going to improve the timescales and obviously reduce the overall costs on the conversion, because when people get to change their boilers when it naturally comes to the end of its life, if you could install a hydrogen ready one that runs on natural gas, it's only a small modification on the day of conversion to convert it over.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to be very cheeky here, and I know there's someone in the audience who provided the appliances to your project.
Yep.
So I'm just going to warm them up, Mr. Paul Needley, that I did have a question about how on earth we, you know, with a decision not coming until 2026 for hydrogen going forward, what on earth do we do with the appliances? And, you know, you've got to have your ducks in a row. So be ready. I will come to you with a question. Charlotte, how about your projects?
Yeah, I think the biggest blocker for us is you don't know what you're going to get till you actually drill the boreholes. And not every scheme we do has boreholes, but the majority of them will do. And it's not like if you're thinking of a wind project or something like that, where you can use, you know, weather data and those kind of things to estimate what your output's going to be. We can't really estimate the heat output from these things until we've drilled and tested the wells. And in other countries where they have insurance schemes that protect against the risk of failed wells, the geothermal sector in those countries has grown. Using the Netherlands as an example, the size of the sector doubled in 5 years because they introduced a risk insurance scheme. They also have like the RHI as well. So hopefully this answer is, as well as thinking about the blockers, is also talking about the kind of subsidy aspect that you were asking for as well. So in somewhere like the Netherlands, they've got an equivalent to the RHI. They've got this risk insurance scheme, and they've also got data all in one place. A lot of this is converting oil and gas wells rather than mine geothermal that we're looking at, but still similar process. So I think that's the key thing for us, is that local authorities are taking a risk when they drill. And at Gateshead, we had to drill more wells than we needed to get the ones that would work, because the plans were 150 years old, and we do as much as we can on paper and beforehand. But there is only so far you can go with that until you actually have to break ground and do something, and that is a big kind of barrier. And I think it puts some people off doing it because they know they might have to do that. And obviously once you've started on your project, if you don't get what you want first time, but you're committed to it, you've got to then, you know, try another location. So I think that's our biggest blocker, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Steve, what about you?
Our blocker's mainly commercial. It's mainly working with our customers to get them to think about the smart rollout as something that is a value added exercise, rather than something that is a thing that needs to be got through, and just shove whatever we can out and get it done. So I think, you know, that's down to us as an industry. I think that's the single biggest blocker there. I would go back to what Darren was talking about at the start, though, and talk about the overall landscape. I think the energy landscape in the UK is hideously confusing for consumers, for householders. You know, as an industry, we're not very good at explaining it to people. And, you know, we've had a legacy. If you look back at cavity wall insulation and double glazing initiatives and the like, you know, it's not a great example exactly to your point about investing in heat pumps or whatever else comes next. You know, difficult to convince people that yes, all of those things we didn't do very well, but honestly, we really know what we're doing this time. So I think that overall confusion in the market is the single biggest blocker. And if events like this and others can help us to get that clearer and straighter and get the messaging better, then I think that's probably the biggest thing we can achieve out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Good observations. Right. I think you have answered the other little warming up questions that were required. So I am going to go straight to the Q&A. And I wondered if Mr. Paul Needley was willing to speak to us just now. I'll just wait a moment whilst he remembers to unmute his mic.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Barbara, for the invitation to speak. We've very much been supporting Mark and his company's projects. Yeah, very exciting future for decarbonised gas, hydrogen. But the problem that we face at the moment is that manufacturers who need to invest in the research and development don't really have a business case for doing so. And as has been mentioned many times, the The government's decision in 2026, and Mark referred to this, is the key turning point. The problem is if manufacturers don't do anything before 2026, then we've lost 3 or 4 years of potential development, and therefore 3 or 4 years of potential hydrogen ready appliances in the field. So at the point of conversion, as Mark said, there will be less appliances already suitable for hydrogen, and therefore it becomes a bigger task. But the problem that we're faced with is manufacturers obviously need to make a business case, they need to make a return on investments, and there's not going to be a large-scale market for hydrogen appliances for 10 or 15 years. So it's very difficult for them to decide to invest in hydrogen test facilities, hydrogen development facilities, and hydrogen products until there's a market there. Now, obviously, hydrogen ready is very good for the industry, very good for the market, but it does mean that you have to develop those hydrogen products and then backward convert them to methane, to operate on methane up until the point of conversion. So it's like a tranche of money that manufacturers have to spend to get the hydrogen ready appliance and then backward convert it. And that cost really needs to be picked up by somebody unless there's some sort of subsidy or business case for it. Manufacturers are on record of saying in volume, it won't put the cost of appliances up. And of course, the other thing, we shouldn't just think about boilers. There's other forms of heating. And again, Mark alluded to the gas fires that are installed in High Home, which we had the privilege to develop as part of a consortium. But there's also cooking, domestic and commercial. Let's not forget commercial as well. As part of the Hive Heat programme, it wasn't just boilers and cookers, it was also commercial air heaters, radiant tube heaters, commercial catering equipment. We have a whole suite of appliances which prove that hydrogen and hydrogen ready is feasible, and they are ready to go. And finally, I think the thing to mention is consumer choice. Everybody agrees that the mix going forwards is a multitude of technologies. It's not all hydrogen, it's not all heat pumps. And Charlotte, very interesting presentation about the mine heat. Fantastic, where there is surplus heat available. And I don't know whether it can apply to rivers or water extraction as well. But wherever the heat's available, then great, use it. But where it isn't, and we fall back on gas, consumer choice comes into it a little bit. And whilst I would assume that most consumers don't really mind where the heating comes from as long as it's comfortable in the room and cost effective, there are consumers who prefer to cook on gas, and some like to have a real flame fire in the as a sort of focal point, whether it's a wood burning stove or a gas fire, etc. But if you want to cook on gas, you put the gas pipe in, you may as well have a gas boiler at the same time. So everything links together. And again, it comes round, I think it was Steve that said, the consumer needs to be involved, the consumer needs to make some choices. So everything really comes together in the long term, I think. Does that answer your question, Barbara?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Now then, I've just scrolled through the questions that have been popped into the chat, and I see we're overrun with comments from someone with a fabulous name, Beanland. I wonder if Beanland would like to condense some of his questions and put them to the panel directly. Is Beanland able to unmute himself? We'll just wait here to see if he does that. No? Okay.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was just waiting for the organisers to give me access to my mic.
All right, okay. So,
Is now done?
Yeah, we can see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, cruel parents on the name front. So I'm just moving over here so I can look straight at you. I'm not quite sure where to start, really. I think the single biggest one for me is the issue about funding, because all these technologies require funding. But anybody who seriously thinks they want to build a business based on subsidy and grants is in cuckoo land, in my view, because they always end in tears. In our case, I represent the Heat Pump Federation, so I have an angle here. Our industry was cut in half by the subsidy scheme that was meant to help it in 2014. So we began in tears, let alone ending in tears. So I'm afraid I've come to the conclusion that grants and subsidies actually are a blocker to investment because they always come with a hard stop. And what happens then? What happens to the market when there's a hard stop? We've seen this with the end of the RHI. We saw it with the end of various other schemes. So I think what we actually need is long-term and stable policy, energy policy, that goes far beyond the 5-year term of any single parliament. So my conclusion is that energy policy is not safe in the hands of politicians. Now, what we do about that, I've absolutely no idea. But frankly, every decision we want to make about big-scale energy takes more than 5 years. You want to build a nuclear power station, you want to build anything, frankly, in this country at the moment, takes you more than 5 years. So we cannot rely on the status quo. We need much more involvement and much more power, in my view, given to people like the National Infrastructure Commission or, frankly, anybody who can give us stable policy, because we know that there is private money sitting out looking for a green home to go to. But they need that stable policy environment. So for me, it's all about how we enable private funding, and it doesn't actually matter to me what the technology is, but it's how we enable that private. One other thing I would say is, this issue about people preferring to cook with gas and what have you. But the choice there is, look, do you want to be able to cook with gas, forever, or do you want acid rain? I mean, we have to make some fundamental choices, and we've got to be honest with the consumers and say, look, if you want to be able to do this, the consequence will be this. And that's an honest choice, when they're presented with all the facts in one place. Giving them one bit of the information and saying, make a choice on that, it isn't really a choice. I spoke to a lady who was living in London, seconded from Sweden. And I said, how are you finding it? She said, I'm fine, but I'm cold. I said, why are you cold? She said, I'm waiting for the boiler to come on at 5 o'clock. If I was in Sweden at home, I'd be warm all day because I'm on a heat network. So she has no choice at all in Sweden because she's on a network. No choice. In London, she's got a choice, but she's freezing cold. So consumer choice, I mean, I accept that we absolutely have to bring the consumer with us. But I'm not quite sure that absolute choice, is the best way of doing that. Well,
we're working under libertarians at the moment, and choice will always be there, I think.
Well, not for a heat network, it isn't.
Well, I take your point about requiring cross-party agreement and longer-term decisions to be made. And honestly, we're always lobbying for that. It's just at the moment we're not being heard. But Darren told us that there's more information coming out, possibly an energy bill could be here tomorrow or the day after. You never know what could be included in that. We live in hope. I don't know whether anyone from our panel would like to respond to what Bean has just said. Yes, Steve.
Just a couple of points on that one. Bean's perspectives, I think, a good one in terms of the frustration with building an industry based on subsidies, although offshore wind did quite well out of it, I would argue, and the UK has a pretty good offshore wind industry as a result, and it's just finding the way to wean people off it. And I think that's exactly the same thing with people. And we kind of, as an industry, and actually as governments as well, we look at people sometimes, I think, just as amorphous blocks, and they're not. People have individual needs and individual pressures, and at the moment those pressures are huge. And certainly from some of the research we've done recently, talking to real people that are trying to manage bills, the amount of fear out there in the general population about just, are they going to be able to survive? Are they going to be able to pay their bills? Will they run into debt? I think if we want people to embrace quite complicated subjects, we need to be able to simplify them right down. So there shouldn't be a debate around hydrogen and gas, because if you start talking to people about hydrogen and gas, it will just confuse the debate. We shouldn't really be talking about heat pumps versus gas boilers. We should be talking about the cost of heating your home, or the cost of cooking your food, or the ease of doing those things. We've got to get the message to a level where it's simple enough. And harsh as it is, actually the current energy prices might help us a bit with making that message really clear, because showing people a difference in cost between future option 1 and future option 2, that's what's going to drive behavior. You know, I think Darren mentioned it in his opening talk. People would like to be environmentally conscious, but they need to be able to afford to pay for their household bills. And if we can solve the need by delivering technology in the right way and solutions in the right way, I think people will go with us as an industry. If we make it sound like there's a big ethereal debate to go through, they'll just glaze over and say, yeah, okay, but how do I get the cheapest solution for X?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any further comments on this? If not, I'm going to move on to an observation that Mike Landy has made. And Mike says, how can we prevent a repeat of the situation experienced in 2015 when the building industry persuaded the government to abandon its zero carbon homes policy? It's such a shame that Darren has had to leave us, but you know, he's got to be in the other place for a statement this afternoon. I mean, it's awful that we had the opportunity to move in 2015, sorry, and we didn't. Is it the case, Steve, you may know, any new build, are the builders still not mandated to install a smart meter as the meter of choice when that house is commissioned?
Gosh,
sorry if I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no. I know that there is a big push to do it, and I know that a number of our customers do those smart meter installs. What they don't have to, so they do have to put the physical smart meters that meter the electricity and the gas. They don't have to leave the energy display in the home. Oh,
right. Okay. And Mark, your builds had smart meters installed at Gateshead?
They are. Yeah, the new hydrogen ready meters are SMETS 2 compatible, which means obviously, so and yeah, that was part of the requirement.
Yeah. Do you know, Charlotte, whether the Seaham Garden project will be smart metered?
I don't know, because we're not involved with the builders on that. It'll be the council that are liaising with them, but you would hope so. There will be obviously the metering for the heat use as well, so there will have to be quite a lot of metering on those properties, I would think.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much for that then. And thank you, Mike, for raising those issues. We have a question from John Barton. I don't know if John would like to ask his question directly. I'll just wait a second to see if he gets his microphone enabled. Poor Dan sat at the ENA end going, what? You should give me some warning, Barbara. I'm working down the list. So, John Barton, are you there?
Okay, I am here, yes. Hello. Everyone. So my question is about zoning for heating.
Can we see you? There we go.
Yeah,
we've got you.
Yeah. So it's about zoning and the importance of avoiding stranded assets above all. So, you know, how far is the process of allocating? So, you know, this street is on a heat network and another street is on a gas network, or a third street is on heat pumps. Thinking about, you know, heating, we don't want more than one heat network in a place, otherwise you have two sets of infrastructure to pay for and stranded assets, and you know, what you need, you know, the heating is a natural monopoly and should be treated as such and regulated as such. I wonder what people think about that. And the idea of zoning was proposed by the ADE, which I think is the Association for Distributed Energy. I wonder, yes, any thoughts, please?
Mark, have you got anything to add from an NGN point of view?
Obviously, there are certain areas that have currently got district heating schemes, and they probably see probably more of that in the future. One thing about having a distributed system rather than heating zones, it does help with the distribution of both electricity and gas. So one of the challenges we've got with hydrogen, for instance, is it's a third of the energy value. So we've actually got to put more of that through our network to give you the same amount of energy to boil your pan, etc. So we're not anti heat pumps. In fact, it would help us. It's just the challenge of the proportion of houses in the UK that currently wouldn't be suitable for heat pumps. Either they need quite a bit of fabric enhancement, which fabric first should actually be the main way of reducing energy bills, whether it be electricity or hydrogen. So yeah, it's just for us, it's a balancing act, and I think this is probably the same for across the electricity network, having to upgrade some of their infrastructure across all the streets across the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything to add, Charlotte or Steve? No.
I think from our point of view, obviously we're not involved in the topside design. We're not heat network engineers or anything. I'm a hydrogeologist, so I'm way out of my comfort zone, so forgive me. But I think from our point of view, we do supply these resources in terms of point discharges of mine water at some of our treatment systems. And then obviously we've got blanket areas across some of the appropriate seams. So we're hoping that the zoning work that is going on will also include where that resource is available to, so that can be looked at. So that's, just as the energy supply rather than the end user. But yeah, it's kind of how we're involved with it.
Yeah.
Just from our perspective, I think it's a really, really interesting point here. How do you convince British households to move off that whole, no, I want to control everything in my home, I want to be in control of it? We're doing some work up in Scotland at the moment with another couple of third-party companies looking at social housing, and actually they've become a really, really interesting asset mix if you can put a big centralized heat source in, whether it's a big heat pump or whether it's a big solar-based plant, or whether it's a mine extraction heat source. Doesn't really matter. One, it's really efficient to do district heating. District heating is more efficient than heating individual homes. And two, if you can put big assets like that to heat hundreds of houses, actually they become really interesting grid assets. A big heat pump is a much more interesting asset than a lot of little ones from a grid perspective, from managing demand response. So, it starts to give you a really interesting mix. Sadly, though, going back to your original question, how do you ensure there's no duplication and crossover? At the moment, unless we get some legislation around that, it's going to be purely on a commercial basis. And I think one of the biggest jobs out there is helping building firms to understand the cost efficiencies of building centralized heat for new build or for refurbishment of brownfield sites. There are economies there, big economies there, but it's not well understood at all at the building level. And it just fits into, again, it's one of those brackets. Yeah, but I know how to put a gas boiler in, so let's just crack on with doing that.
Yeah. Right. Okay, we will move on. Got a question here from Adrian Wadelove. Now, Adrian makes a statement here. The government seems reluctant to embrace and legislate hydrogen-ready boilers in domestic settings. Mark, do we know why?
Not specifically. I'm assuming because there's no decision to move to hydrogen in 2026. So that's what I'm assuming, unless Paul knows otherwise. But not. I'm assuming just they don't want to make a decision that's a wrong decision.
Yeah.
Even though the cost is parable.
Yeah. Okay, we have another statement further down from Cara Naden, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Priority 1, improve energy efficiency of homes so heating demand is greatly reduced. The best possible energy is that you don't need to use, isn't it? I mean, couldn't agree with you more there. Now then, Steve Harper, large networks of plastic or steel pipework don't sit with net zero embodied carbon aspirations, particularly when we're building a duplicate network. Steve, do you want to expand on that or say anything, or have our panel a response to that one?
I can respond if
Yes, please.
We won't be building a duplicate network. We are planning to repurpose the existing network, and you're probably aware that for the last 20 plus years we've in the gas industry had the mains replacement program, where we've been replacing all the old metallic mains, be it cast iron and ductile iron, etc., for the plastic, which is hydrogen ready and has welded joints, so you don't get those leaks. So yeah, that'll be ready. So it's repurposing what we got existing. I've just seen Steve's actually said he was talking about the district heating pipe work.
Right.
So I'm not too familiar with that.
No. Is there a scenario? I know you don't deal with the infrastructure above ground so much, Charlotte, for the pipe work into the homes. Have you any views on that or any insight?
I mean, there was one thing I was thinking about when, because I think there's some, we've been looking at, well, I'm saying the people we work with have been looking at using plastic pipe work for a variety of reasons, you know, easier to deal with. And we've got different health and safety laws for working in trenches and making the joints and all that stuff, as I understand. So plastic has proved to be better for some of the projects that we've been involved with. But I asked the question to somebody about whether that plastic could, we could use recycled plastics for it, as one way of trying to reduce embodied carbon and reuse something that's generally a bit problematic. And I suppose it just needs to be looked at, doesn't it? What's the difference between the embodied carbon in that network or everybody having the kind of individual approach that they have now? It's a comparison, isn't it?
Indeed. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take one last question here, which Cara has just snuck in. Cara, would you like to ask this yourself? I'll just give Dan a moment to unmute your microphone. It's about biomethane biogas. Are you there, Cara?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, my question is about biomethane gas generated from waste gas, either from sewage and farm and food waste, which would be a greener, lower embodied energy gas to put into the network. I just wondered where that features in terms of finding alternatives to fossil fuel gas.
It currently is injected into the network at various different locations. In terms of going forward, there was a Navigant report that was done probably maybe 3-4 years ago, where actually it looked at looking at biomethane, particularly in the south of the UK, areas where it's difficult to have or got limited industrial clusters where production of hydrogen would be limited or restricted. So it has been talked about. It's the question would be about the volume of that biomethane that currently produced. It's something like 2% of the gas in the network. Probably not even that much, but you know, it's the larger volumes that's going to be needed going forward would be the biggest challenge.
I guess the point is we're not really utilising opportunities like sewage, which could generate, I guess, quite a lot. and certainly food waste, of which, you know, part of the problem is we produce too much food waste, so we need to really drive that down. But there's still a huge amount of waste that's generated, even such as stalks and things that can't necessarily be consumed, but there's enough potential biogas in that. Apparently in a stalk from a Brussels sprout plant, the amount of biogas you can get from that stalk is enough to boil those Brussels sprouts. So it seems like a really logical thing to be looking more down that route than to hydrogen, which requires huge amounts of renewable energy, which you might as well just use directly rather than putting it through the gas hydrogen process.
Yeah, at the moment there are various different forms, but you're right, not in the volumes that could be produced. So yeah, waste from sewage farms is re-injected, and we've got one in our network. An example is waste from ice cream that is actually used and produces biomethane. Yeah, the other option is if one of the challenges we've got with biomethane and connections is where they're producing it against where we've got a gas network in the right, in the right location to be able for them to use it. So that is also one challenge. One option is we use some form of conversion process and make that into hydrogen that is transportable more easily more transportable. By one project we're thinking about is using pyrolysis, for instance, but again you're using energy to convert it, so it's a difficult discussion really.
Okay, right, thank you very much. Charlotte, have you anything to add before I wrap up?
No, thank you.
Steve, anything from you? No?
No, it's been a great session.
Okay. And Mark, you're quite happy there?
Yeah, no, it's been good discussions. Yeah, good questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the questions in the chat as well. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here, first of all, with a few adverts, because I know you must have loved this session and be desperate to know if there are more in the pipeline. So our Next for Net Zero event today is a series of events that the ENA are holding throughout the year to focus on solutions being deployed to help reach net zero. The next event will be held on the 5th of September, so get that date in your diary, and it's going to be focusing on locally and regionally led energy plans with Mark Atherton, Director of Environment at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and he's discussing the Greater Manchester Local Area Energy Plan. If there are any topics that you really think would be great to cover, then please let us know and send an email to info@energynetworks.org. We'd be really pleased to hear from you. Also, this one's a must go to, so I hope you've got your pen and your pencils ready. The ENA is hosting a parliamentary reception alongside the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Energy Studies next Tuesday evening. It's at 7 o'clock on the House of Commons terrace. You've got to be there or be square. It offers a great chance to speak with members of Parliament, the Lords, industry and academia, and we hope to see you sign up to that one. Finally, I would like to say a huge thank you to our speakers today. It was a great keynote from Darren Jones MP, even though he didn't realise he was doing a keynote. It sounded pretty keynote to me. And I'll be looking forward to catching up on Parliament TV to see what his statements were this afternoon. Thank you very, very much for the introduction from Randolph Brazier of the ENA, and to our three speakers, Dr. Charlotte Adams, Steve Cunningham and Mark Danter. There's more information in the chat there if you want more information about what they're up to. Thank you to the audience for your questions and lively debate, and a huge thanks actually to PROSEG, who have been supporting us with this event. I can't close the session without saying a huge thank you to Daniel Cleland and Joshua Atkins for their determination and organisation skills that have contributed to the success of this event. Can I wish that you all stay safe, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Thank you. Well done, speakers.